Chapter 5, Lesson 5, Compare Decimals and Fractions. Our content target. Students will understand that rational numbers can be compared and ordered. Our language target. Students will show their understanding of rational numbers by explaining ways to compare and order rational numbers with a partner. Compare decimals and fractions. Positive and negative rational numbers can be represented on a number line. You can use a number line to help you compare and order rational numbers. So before we get into comparing, I want you to know a couple of things, and this is important, so I would write this down somewhere in your math notebook. Any positive number is greater than a negative number. So 6 is greater than -1. Any negative number is less than a positive number. So -1 is less than 6. 0 is less than any positive number, so 0 is less than 1. And 0 is greater than any negative number, so such as 0 is greater than -1. So sometimes you don't even have to compare. You just simply need to look at the signs, and that's going to help you out. Okay, so let's look at example number 1. Fill in the circle with a less than, greater than, or equal to make the true statement. So when I look, I have -1.2 and 0.8. So here's my number line. So I can go -1.2, here's 0. My negatives, remember, are on the left. Positives are on the right. So I go from 0 to -1.2. Here's my dot. 0.8, I start at 0. I go to 0.8 on the right because it's positive. So when you compare those, which one's furthest to the right? That's going to be your greater number. Well, 0.8 is over here. Also, this one is negative, this one's positive. So if we look over here on our chart, negatives are always less than positives. So -1 2/10 is less than 8/10, just by looking at the signs. So let's look at these two. -1 40 hundredths and -1 25 hundredths. So they're both negative, so we can't use that rule. So we have to look at the numbers. So this number has two numbers after the decimal, and this number has 2 numbers after the decimal. So if they have the same number of digits after the decimal, take the decimal out and say -140 and -125. So remember how we compare negative numbers? Which one's closest to 0 is the larger number. Well, -125 is closer to 0 than -140. So our sign has to go like that. -140 is less than -125. So -1 40 hundredths is less than -1 25 hundredths. The next one, we have -3/8 and -5 16ths. So for this one, we can use the butterfly method. Okay, so what we do is we're going to cross multiply. So I have 3/8 and 5 16ths. They're both negative. So I'm going to multiply the bottom denominator 8 times the numerator at the top. So 8 times 5 is 40, and it's negative. And 16 times 3 is 18, is 48, which is negative. So -48 and -40, which one's closest to 0 because they're both negative? Well, that's this one here, -40. So in that case, -3/8 is less than -5 16ths. So here's a couple more to try. So letter A, 3 1/10 and negative 3 7/10. Again, positive, negative. I know that positive numbers are larger than negative numbers. So 3 1/10 is greater than negative 3 7/10. Letter B, negative 4 1/2 and negative 4 49 hundredths. So they're both negative, they're both decimals. This side has two numbers after the decimal. This one only has one. So what we can do is that we can change that by simply adding a 0 to give me two digits after the decimal, and it doesn't change the value. So now look at these numbers, 450, 449. They're both negative, so which one is closer to 0? That's correct. 449 is closer to 0. So negative 4 1/2 or 4 50 hundredths is less than negative 4 49 hundredths. Letter C, 9 sixteenths and 12 sixteenths. So here our denominators are the same. So when denominators are the same, we compare the numerator. 9 and 12. Well, I know that 9 is less than 12, so 9 sixteenths is less than 12 sixteenths because 9 is less than 12. Letter D is negative 7 tenths and negative 4 fifths. Again, since we have different denominators, we can cross multiply. 10 times 4 is 40, which is negative because they're both negative. 5 times 7 is 35, which is negative. So which of those two numbers is closer to 0? Correct, negative 35. So negative 7 tenths is greater than negative 4 fifths. So when we compare and order rational numbers, the first thing we want to do is write them in the same form. I always say change fractions to decimals. Then compare. Okay? So number 4, it says negative 51 hundredths and negative 8 fifteenths. So we taught the last lesson about changing a fraction to a decimal. We're going to do the same thing here. This one's already in a decimal form, so I want to change negative 8 fifteenths to a decimal. So I'm going to take 8 divided by 15. So I go to my calculator. 8 divided by 15, and I get a 0.53333333. So remember, our 3 is repeating, so it gets the hat. So back here, I get a negative 0.53 with a hat over it. So which one's closer to 0? Is it negative 51 or negative 53? Well, 51 is closer to 0 because they're both negative. 51, negative 51 hundredths is greater than negative 8 fifteenths. Change fractions to decimals. So here we are going to order the set from least to greatest. So from our numbers here, we want to put those in order from smallest to largest. So I already have 1 as a decimal, so we're going to change the other 2 to a decimal as well. Okay, so the negative 2's are going to both stay on those 2 mixed numbers. So 22 25ths, we have to divide. 22 divided by 25, that's 0.88. And notice that it's not repeating because it stops. So that's a terminating. So over here, I have 2.88. and then 1/10. I take 1 divided by 10 to give me 0.1. Again, it's terminating, it stops. So we're going to go back, and it's 2.1. So I'm going to compare all of these. So this one has 2 numbers, this one has 2 after the decimal, this one only has 1. So I need to add a 0 so they each have 2 numbers. So now as I look at those, I think of negative 246, negative 288, and negative 210. Since we're comparing all negatives, which one is closest to 0? That's going to be your larger number. Well, 210 is closest to 0, so we have 210 as our largest number. Between these two, which one is our larger number? Which one's closest to 0, 46 or 88? That would be 46, so negative 2.46. Which means that negative 2.88 is the smallest. But I can't leave it that way because some of these numbers are not in our original set of numbers. So I've got to change those back to the mixed numbers. So negative 2.88 was negative 2 and 22/25. Negative 2.46 was of decimal. And negative 2 and 1/10 was negative 2 and 1/10. So there's my order from least to greatest. You have to make sure you switch them back. So let's take a couple more practices here. So in letter E, negative 3 and 5/8, negative 3 and 6.25. So I want to change this one here to a decimal. So negative 3 is my whole number. So I want to change 5/8 to 5 divided by 8, which is 0.625. So I go back and I go 6.25 and negative 3.625. Well, it looks like they all have the same numbers. So this one is equal. Let's look at 3/7 and and 0.413. We have to change 3/7 to a decimal. So I go to my calculator. Three divided by 7 is 0.42857142857. So notice that they are repeating. 428571, 48257, and if there was another space, it would be 1. So 0.428571. 0.42857. And this one here is 0.413. So let's look at the first 3 numbers. 428, 413. Which number is larger? Well, 428 is larger than 417. So 3/7 is greater than 413 thousandths. So if we look at letter G, we have to order our set from greatest to least this time. So largest to smallest. So let's change our fractions or mixed numbers into decimals. So I have -7 and 13/20. So I'm going to go to my calculator. And I'm going to go 13 divided by 20. And I get a 0.65. So I go back to here, 0.65, negative 7.78, and then I have a negative 7 and 1700ths, which is 17 divided by 100 is 0.17. So it's 17. So now I want to compare those. So again, which one of those is closest to 0 is the largest? Well, 17 is closer to 0 than 78 or 65. So this one would be number 1. 78 and 65. Well, 65 is closer to 0 than 78, so this would be 2, and here would be 3. So there we have our order. But we have to write those as we did up here. So I have negative 7.65, negative 7.78, negative 7.17. So I'm going to put those back in order and in the original mixed numbers. So it's negative 6.75, that was our negative 7, 13/20. Scratch that. We're going to go back. I'm going to erase that because that's not right. Just checking to see if you guys are paying attention today. Our first one is negative 7 and 1700ths. Our next one was negative 7 and 65, which was negative 7 and 13/20. And the last one is negative 7 and 7/8. Make sure that when you compare fractions and decimals, that you change each number to a fraction. That is not right. Do not listen to that. Make sure you change it to a decimal. Change them to a decimal, then compare. Okay, comparing fractions and decimals, make sure you change fractions to a decimal before you compare.